Global Times, 5th of December 2022, Saudi Arabia looks to the East for its future wealth and pushes for transformation. Since the United States no longer wants to be the world's police force, Saudi Arabia desperately searches for a substitute. I hope China can satisfy this need. According to a recent report from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, China will view the upcoming summit between China and Arab states as an opportunity to advance traditional friendship, deepen cooperation in all areas, increase exchanges between respective civilizations, and create a community of China-Arab states with a shared future in the new era. Despite having hit its peak, Saudi Arabia is a global energy giant with the world's second-largest proven crude oil reserves. Saudi Arabia has been working to further the long-term development objective through several forms and opening up in recent years in itself off of its reliance on the oil sector. Saudi Arabia, a nation playing an increasingly significant role in world affairs, has been leaning east and investing in the future in search of long-term prosperity. According to experts, China and Saudi Arabia's mutually beneficial collaboration can aid in achieving these objectives. China and Saudi Arabia seek economic diversification from reliance on oil sources. Known as the birthplace of Islam, Saudi Arabia is a mystery to many who have never visited the Gulf nation that stands as an oil kingdom. The changes in Saudi Arabia since the Global Times correspondent's last visits are plain to see. Many provinces are seeing an increase in foreign tourists, and the number and application of the religious police seem to have decreased with time. Saudi Arabia's central city, Riyadh, is now a green, lively, and sophisticated place with fantastic pop star shows, competitive boxing fights, women driving vehicles, and launching theaters. According to recent reports from regional news media, Saudi Arabia has officially bid to host the AFC Women's Asian Cup in 2026. According to the consensus on the international stage, Saudi Arabia cannot implement its Vision 2030 and National Transformation Program 2020 without them. Through its 8 strategic topics, the program was introduced in 2016 to achieve governmental operational excellence and create the required framework for enhancing economic growth and raising the level of living. Observers noted that Saudi Arabia is increasingly looking to Asia for a variety of development options as it quickens economic reforms to wean itself off oil. Due to its size, economic power, and independent foreign policy, Saudi Arabia will experience more significant changes in the future, according to Mohammed Al-Kimal, director of the Institute of Arab Research and Studies in Egypt, who spoke to the Global Times. A Saudi-style reform and opening up has been in motion since the implementation of Vision 2030, transforming the nation from a traditional energy-dependent state to a modern one with a diversified economy, according to Wang Tingyi, an assistant professor of Islamic studies at Tsinghua University who has been following the developments in Saudi Arabia for years, according to the Global Times. First, there has been a massive rise in Saudi women's social participation. Wang said that women now make up more than half of the workforce at the King Khalid International Airport in Riyadh and that many women work in the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia's headquarters, both of which were previously unthinkable. Second, sentiments among young Saudis have changed. In the past, young Saudis were hesitant to take up manual tasks like taxi driving, which migrant workers typically filled from Pakistan and India. Migrant workers from Pakistan and India typically filled. In Saudi Arabia today, Uber drivers are predominantly young locals who work other part-time jobs. Young Saudis even set up street kiosks in Dammam, an eastern Saudi city, he claimed. According to Wang, Saudi Arabian tourist visas used to be quite challenging to obtain, but now, provided applicants complete all the standards for visa applications, they can be issued in just a few minutes. According to Wang, these modifications are a part of a more significant trend in Saudi Arabia, where the Crown Prince has a significant enabling and decision-making role. Saudi Arabia has an extraordinarily young and expanding population, with over 70% of the population under 40. He emphasized that the historically predominantly oil-dependent social assistance system and generally conservative cultural climate cannot accommodate the young population's expanding employment and living requirements. Unbundling with the U.S. because the U.S. is leaving the Middle East and has its own oil. Saudi Arabia gained more attention from Western nations this year after the Russia-Ukraine conflict heated up. The German media reported that the ice-breaking trip by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar in September was intended to increase strategic energy cooperation between Germany and the Arab world as well as to ease the energy crisis this winter by purchasing liquefied natural gas. U.S. President Joe Biden has repeatedly attempted to convince Saudi Arabia to raise its oil production. As most of its members have hit peak oil, OPEC Plus announced a considerable reduction in production following a meeting in October of this year. The 34th OPEC and non-OPEC ministerial meeting were held remotely on December 4, which caused anxiety in the US and European nations that the oil supply would be further reduced. According to Fatah al-Walalu, a former Moroccan Minister of Economy and Finance, Saudi Arabia significantly influences OPEC. Walalu asserts that Saudi Arabia uses the competition over oil prices as an important negotiating tool to retain its position and clout in international affairs. According to him, Saudi Arabia has made considerable progress by reducing output and bringing the OPEC Plus members together to work as a single entity. Naturally, less control over oil translates to less authority overall for Saudi Arabia since the commodity is a vital tool used by the government to shape global affairs and command attention, according to Foreign Affairs magazine. It is widely assumed in Western media that the US's old Arab allies are no longer the takers who will accede to the Biden administration's demands for reduced oil prices to weaken Russia and ease Western economies. Because it is not in the two countries' economic interests because Saudi Arabia's oil reserves have peaked and can only go down, U.S. President Joe Biden has repeatedly attempted to convince Saudi Arabia to raise its oil production. Observers noted that the Saudis lost faith in the U.S. when the West collectively froze the assets of several nations. Regarding geopolitics, Saudi Arabia and the UAE currently think that they can resolve regional issues without the US and pursue separate policies within the framework of OPEC+. They also believe that the US cannot tell Gulf nations how they should continue under any circumstances. Why does America keep trying to leave Saudi Arabia? In a November 17 piece, Vox posed this question. After all, the U.S. depends on the kingdom as a big oil producer, economic power with key shipping lanes, a close ally in the fight against Iran and terrorist organizations, significant trading partner, and the country that buys the most U.S. weapons. The perception of common interests, Saudi Arabia's limited clout, and Biden's inner circle's preferences all support maintaining the status quo. China claims it doesn't want to be pushed to choose sides, but Iran is displeased. With some suggesting both parties appear to have begun a long divorce, the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. has recently worsened. In several areas, such as security and economics, the U.S. still has the upper hand over Saudi Arabia. Wang, however, asserts that the U.S.-Saudi relationship based on oil for security has been in place for almost 80 years. While China's trade with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf Arab nations is expanding quickly, and the mutual trust between the two countries is gradually improving, there is still room for development in the cultural and social exchanges between the two countries. Saudi Arabia has substantial holdings in the U.S., and several influential Saudi organizations employ certain American elites as advisors. Personnel is frequently exchanged between the two sides. Wang stated to the Global Times that the summit would be a turning point in the history of China-Arab ties and a significant event in promoting the high-quality development of China-Arab relations. The tighter ties between China and Saudi Arabia are also beneficial for the multipolarization of the world community and the stability in the Gulf area, as they serve as representatives of several cultures. He continued that the performance of Saudi Arabia and other Gulf governments in the Ukraine conflict and the European energy crisis, as well as their participation in regional affairs and their change, have drawn particular attention given their uncertain relationship with the U.S. However, some Western observers think Saudi Arabia is attempting to strike a balance between China and the U.S. However, as some analysts have pointed out, several Middle Eastern nations feel that they rely too heavily on the West. China is now providing them with a broader range of options. China wants to base its aircraft carrier fleet in Djibouti and find reliable oil supplies. In the Middle East, where the U.S. historically held sway, Riyadh has strengthened its connections with Washington's adversaries, according to a recent piece in The Wall Street Journal. According to the story, Saudi officials dispute U.S. accusations of supporting Moscow and stress that they don't want to be compelled to choose between significant countries as they did during the Cold War, when Saudi Arabia firmly supported the U.S. In reaction to the U.S. coercive diplomacy, Li Haidong, a professor from the Institute of International Relations at the China Foreign Affairs University in Beijing, told the Global Times on Monday that Saudi Arabia and other Gulf nations should forge relationships with China. They reject the idea of serving as the U.S.'s vassal. I pointed out that it serves the interests of Gulf states to pursue autonomous and equitable diplomacy. According to him, China and Gulf states can collaborate in various areas, not just in the energy sector. They can also work together on significant global concerns.